And offices are going to be moved to a separate building, but this space is going to be opened up. And as an inside out museum, this is sort of what we're thinking the space will look like, where this room right here will be a learning laboratory. And people who come into the museum will be able to see what's happening in the learning lab. For instance, this talk that we're giving now and working with the Shawnee Tribe Cultural Center would probably take place in that space. We're going to have remote learning capabilities. There will be a number of monitors and ways for people to communicate with one another um, uh, from this particular room. Interestingly, our guests and visitors to the museum might be able to see work that we're working on or the conversations that we might be having, as long as they're open and okay to the public, through a monitor just outside. So that's kind of the idea of the Inside Out Museum. I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the collaborations, and start with some collaborations that have happened in the past, but are ones that we really hope to see increase in the future. This is one that was about Haitian drums, and really, this is one that helped work and deal with environmental stewardship and how that affects some indigenous populations. This was work done by Professor Dirksen, and the issue here is that these drums are very important to the culture in Haiti, yet in the area that's the homelands for these indigenous people, um, are changing. And as the environment changes, the trees are moving out of the area and they're having a harder making the drums. And this is the kind of environmental stewardship that we're very interested in pursuing as we collaborate with others. Similarly, this is work done by Eduardo Rondizio, who's in the anthropology department, on forest farmers in Brazil who are subsistence farmers losing their habitat for farming to deforestation. And the issues surrounding this were brought up in exhibits at the Mathers Museum of World Culture. So another one that we were very happy to bring to the public and have Eduardo curate. But this is also the kind of work that we're hoping to do in the future, as is this next example, which I think people are pretty familiar with, the pottery project that was a part of the cultural center. But here, this is exactly the kind of stuff that we would like to do in the future with our laboratory and our partners. And it's a wonderful project that was part experimental archaeology, where people were trying to understand the clay and the temper and the heating temperatures, and how well, of course, in the end, these pots helped us with making meals and how well it worked under different circumstances. I'm sure most of you recognize this gentleman who played a major role in this as well. We also are currently working on collaborations. This is a part of a program that, of course, we're doing online with this individual who's a collections manager with us, Emily Bryant, who was giving the talk. And she's currently working with getting indigenous people to help with interpretations on the North African and Near Eastern garments. Many of these, the one I was just showing, have to do with sort of coming of age garments and what the meanings behind these were to the cultures. This really helps us with other collaborations that we do on campus with other IU departments and with our community here in central Indiana. I'm going to move back to some of our collaborations that we have also done with Native American colleagues. We are trying hard to establish collaborations with a number of tribes and creating new relationships. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few slides to come. This past summer, we developed and recruited for a Native American Summer Fellowship. The initial goal, it's one of those COVID things, the initial goal was to have two students come and work with us on our collections and be on site and actually work with collections that were part of their heritage. But COVID hit, and IU, of course, forbade us from bringing people onto campus. And what we did is create a virtual fellowship where the students were paid and allowed to work with us and help us think through a number of various issues. And was a really wonderful project that we will continue in the future. It will not happen this year, as we're doing too much with regards to the museum and the museum planning, but it will happen in the future. We're also in the midst of continuing consultations with tribal officials, with NAGPRA, in particular NAGPRA collections that were formerly held at the Glenn Black Lab. As a largely white university and staff here at our museum, we also are working hard to have better insight and understanding. So we have worked with diversity, equity, and inclusion workshops, as well as cultural awareness workshops, to try to make sure that we understand perspectives and that we are respectful as we move forward in all of our collaborations. One set of collaborations have been happening on a weekly basis for a little over 6 months, that has just shifted to meetings that will happen every other week. And these are meetings with our largely Native American partners to discuss some of our exhibits and research on the artifacts that we hold, and how we can respectfully and sensitively show objects and work with communities who are the source communities for many of the different objects that we will be working with. Obviously, Zoom is not the best method. I mean, even today, I would much prefer to be in Oklahoma giving this talk and sort of getting feedback from people that I see. But this is how we have to do it for now. And hopefully the vaccines will change the way that we do this particular work. We have notified a large number of tribes and requested input and collaborations with a very large number of tribes. Most of these on the left are ones that we are working with every other week, and others that we do still work with, but more on occasion. And not all of these have to do with angel mounds. We have collections from the Midwest, from throughout the Midwest, and many collections from throughout Indiana, not just the southern Indiana. So there are many groups that we are trying to work with and are working with, and the team has done a really terrific job. Very proud of the work that we've been able to do in getting us started. We realize that there's a long way to go and that we're on the front end of making relationships. We do have an opportunity to continue to build on relationships that have been made in the past. But to us, it's also extremely important that we continue these relationships and expand. We're also working with some tribal colleagues as we develop management plans for the site of Angel Mounds and also for the museum. And again, I'll reiterate, Zoom's not the preferred method for doing this. It makes it a lot harder to get to do these collaborations, but it seems to be allowing us to learn an awful lot. We do know, like I said, we have a long way to go, but each group that we are working with is unique and very different. And probably the most important parts that we've learned is that our tribal colleagues would like us to promote a few ideas to the visitors in Indiana to our museum. One is that indigenous people are still here, their culture is vibrant, the tribes are resilient, and these are all notions and ideas that we're trying to weave into not only our exhibits, but also the research that we do, and have these points and the multiple viewpoints be brought together to really create better interpretations and outcomes. We've heard quite a bit, nothing about us without us, and that is something we've taken to heart and are truly trying to continue to be aware of. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk some about some future collaborations. This is what you see in this image on the left is some ridge and furrow agriculture that is currently, this is an image from Michigan, and we had a site where we were able to find what appears to be the furrows. This image right here is pitched 25 feet by 25 feet, and these are the remains, we believe, of furrows that were a part of ridge and furrow agriculture. And this would be really interesting to view like and this, once we bisected it here, this is what these different soils that are within here, these different sediments that were a part of the firm that we're hoping to get into with a number of different collaborators in the future. At Angel Mounds and at other places, we are starting to use more non-destructive methodologies like ground penetrating radar or LIDAR that can show us very subtle differences, like not even an inch, and we can see differences on the ground in the topography. For instance, that particular image, we can see a little bit of erosion happening. And this is the type of thing now that we're going to try to do long-term and monitor certain sites, but it does provide us this other opportunity of, this is a view of Angel Mounds, and I'll explain more about the site in a little bit. But what we're able to see with this LIDAR are things that we've never been able to see before. Like, we don't know exactly what these things are, but eventually we want to collaborate with different groups and begin to investigate. We hope to also collaborate on a number of artifacts and objects that we have in our collections that we aren't really sure exactly what they are. Some of these are thousands of years old, and there's many things like this in the museum that we can use some help on as we work on interpretations. I've also been asked, Chief Glenna Wallace was asking about some of the trails in the region, and we're working on digitizing maps. This particular one was developed in the 30s from maps that were 17th and 18th century. So it happens to be a series of trails through Indiana that existed around the turn of the century. And we also have future collaborations that we'd like to work on with other units at Indiana University. We would love to have the museum be part of sort of the native culture here at Indiana University and work with these other units to develop just that. So with regards to collaborations, we have made progress, and we also realize we have a long way to go. And we are very, very proud and happy to be able to work with the colleagues that we have and the tribal partners that we have been working with. I'm going to sort of shift gears because these collaborations also, we hope, will spill over into some of the Mound alignments that that I'll be talking about here in the second part of the talk. I'll start by giving some background of Angel Mounds, briefly talk about the recent research, and then the alignments. For those of you who don't know, Angel Mounds is located in the southwestern corner of Indiana. right across the Ohio River from Kentucky and not far from Illinois. It is, that's what this image is showing. This is sort of showing the Angel polity and a number of the sites that were occupied in very similar time periods as Angel. Angel, although it was occupied before, the site, the Mississippian part of the site, started sometime after about 1050 and lasted till around 1425 or so, maybe 1450. And important here also is the Green River. The confluence of the Green River is really only a couple hundred meters downstream. The next image I'll show you is an aerial image of the site. This image is looking sort of east-southeast. This is Mound A, the main mound on the site. It's longer than a football field. This upper platform is the main part of this mound with a conical offset in the southeastern corner of the mound. You'll see a couple of images of this as I go through the talk. And then the lower platform. This lower platform was very important in the alignments, as we believe it was an area that people viewed other alignments from. This area here is what we call the east village of the site. This is Mound B, and L is over here, but I will show you the layout of the mounds here. There are 11 mounds in this portion of the site. The site is bigger than this. It actually extends northward of this slough that is here. The slough, interestingly, would have made the site. For the rest of this talk, Mound A, Mound F, Mound E, and H are going to come into play quite a bit. These mounds also are a part of alignments, as is Mound C. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about, instead of jumping right into the alignments, a little bit about the background of the alignments and what these are relative to. So I'll start first with special days in the year, like solstices. To explain the solstice, the summer solstice isn't just the longest day of the year. And the winter solstice isn't just the shortest day of the year. As we all know, the sun rises in the east, sets in the west. And at different times in the year, it might rise a little more to the north or set a little more to the north. We know in the wintertime, of course, the sun is setting much more towards the south as the days grow shorter. But the solstice itself refers to sol means sun, and stis is sort of like a standstill or a halt. And the reason that it's called a solstice is the sun might rise or set, at different times in different places. So the sun might set here at different times and eventually make it to its northernmost spot. And when it does so, it appears to set in that same spot for a few days in a row. It's not really, it's just imperceptible to us that the difference in where it actually sets, but it appears to set in the same place for a few days. Same on the winter solstice. The moon also does something similar. We're going to talk about that here in a little bit. So basically, those are the solstices. The equinox is the day of equal amount of daytime and equal amount of nighttime, where the sun is actually appears to be rising and setting right on the equator. So in angel mounds, we have this relationship between Mound F and Mound A, where if you were on Mound F on the morning of the summer solstice, you would see the sunrise directly over the center of Mound A. Now, this is something that was first hypothesized a couple decades ago by Wolfirth and Wolfirth. And as I move on to this is another way of sort of looking at it. This is the same image you just saw, but if you were standing on Mound F looking towards Mound A, that's what it would That's the view line you would have, and that's what it would look like. This image was actually taken on the morning of the summer solstice this past year. So it's no longer a hypothesis. We know that it occurs, and we know that this happens. This is the upper platform of Mound A. This is that conical offset that was built later. And then this is that lower platform that I was talking about. I'm going to now show an image of Mound F. Mound F itself had a very large building on it. It was over 120 feet in length. It also had a series, a wall, probably like a palisade or a stockade around it that's being sort of represented by this blue dashed line. And we know it from all these small post holes that were a part of, we learned this through excavations that occurred 80 or so years ago. But interestingly, there's a gap in that wall directly as you look to Mound A. So interestingly, this was clearly a part of a plan. And it may be a part of the plan as to why the site is actually in this part of the river. This is the only part of the river for this much space. There's a couple of kilometers shown there. That the site is at this, it is on the river is actually on this orientation that seems to be so important to the site. And it's kind of a temporal or seasonal, let's say, pivot point. It's balanced between these sort of complementary opposites, the summer sunrise and then the winter solstice sunset that occurs at almost the same yet complementary angle. So that is the main solar alignment. It kind of will come back into play when I get into the celestial alignments. For the moon, on this image, if you kind of ignore the palisade lines and think about these ones with arrows, much of the site is set up on this about 23-degree east of north orientation. We see it between Mound F and E, the orientation of this mound. I'll show you a little more about that later. But that happens to be perpendicular to the northern minimum moon set. What on earth is that? I'll talk about that as we move forward. But that was also hypothesized by Peterson and Pocketet about a decade ago. And we've learned that there's more sense, like this southern minimum moon set. The really interesting part of these moon alignments is that you really have to study moon sets over generations to get an understanding of how the moon moves and where it might be at different times. I'll start with a brief explanation here, as brief as I can make it, on why it takes 18.6 years for that sort of lunar cycle. We know that the Earth is rotating around the sun and the moon is going around the Earth. And as that happens, if we just take and think about the Earth, we know that the axis of the Earth is tilted. That's how we get, of course, our seasons, but it's tilted such that the spin of the Earth isn't on the same plane as the Earth going around the sun. Instead, it's at this angle that we have, the Earth's tilt. Adding to that, we have the moon that is on its own orbit. That orbit is tilted, so it's not necessarily the rotation of the moon that is tilted like the Earth, but it's the way the actual orbit around the Earth that's tilted. If we then add to that this idea that the axis is also wobbling, so instead of the axis just spinning nicely, it wobbles like this. And the result basically is that, it takes about 18.6 years for the moon to get from one place where it sets on the horizon back to that same exact spot. If you conceptually think of it, we think of the Earth in the center of a ball. And this is going to be pre-Galileo with the sun going around the Earth. And the sun is going around in one particular orbit, and the moon then is also going around, but it's offset, that tilt in the orbit. What that basically means is for the moon to get back to, from our perspective on the Earth, back to the same place where it either rises or sets, it takes 18.6 years to complete that. To add to that a little bit, and this all goes back to the brilliance of the occupants at Angel Mounds. The lunistices, these are the days where the moon appears to have a pause for a couple days from where it might rise to where it sets. And like the sun, the moon might set in a more northerly position or a more southerly position. And there's a couple of different maximums for the moon. It has one range that it will stay between during a time period on the horizon, this is, and then another range that's much bigger. And as we consider that, the large range of the moon is seen here, and then the shorter range of how the moon might move across the sky, rise and set, is shown by these smaller lines. And at Angel Mounds, this is what is codified on the ground at the site. The northern part and the southern part of this minimum movement of the moon. And this is what it looks like. I would like to say also, I am not an archaeoastronomer. My co-author his name is Bill Romaine, and Bill has worked on many sites in North and also across the world. This is what he does, and he too was fascinated by some of these discoveries. Interestingly, a number of the mounds come into play. These smaller mounds, I and D, Mound B, and if you'll notice, we also have the conical offset that comes into play. The conical offset would have been a perfect place to watch the stars and for sky gazing generally. But many of the mounds are clearly related to the north minimum set and the south minimum set. If you were standing, for instance, this image shows us on Mound I, which is right here, but it would also be from the lower platform right here, or if you were standing on top of the conical offset. All of these would provide a view for you once every about 19 years of the moon setting on the very center of that building that was on Mound F. Absolutely brilliant. I'm going to move now into our celestial alignments. The site, as I mentioned before, set up on this about 23-degree axis is what we call the angel alignment. And there are a number of associations to this 23 degrees east of north. If we consider Mound F as an observational location, like it was for the summer solstice sunrise, we also have very interesting connections to the Milky Way. If we're standing on Mound F, and this happens only one day a year, happens to be the same day that we saw the sun rising over Mound A. It's the night, of the summer solstice. But Mound F is going to be our observational space, and then the next image I'm going to show you, we're going to be looking north towards Mound E. And what happens once it is dark is that we see the Milky Way as if it's emanating out of Mound E in that general direction. If we turn around and look south, we also see that the Milky Way is touching and almost coming out of the Mound H. Mount H had been an enigma for a long time as to why it was located where it was, and I'll show you an image of that also in a moment. But this is sort of what it might look like. This 23 degrees is exactly where Mound E was, or sorry, is, if you're standing on Mound F and looking towards the north. And if you then look towards the south, right here is where Mound H would be as you're looking towards the south. And what's interesting, if it's even just a few minutes after it's in the very center here, it's going to be very close. Mound H is going to be very close to the center as you look towards the south. And I'll reiterate that this happens only on the night of the summer solstice. It might be close the day before or the day after, similarly with this notion of the solstice. But this is when it really comes together and is just about perfect as just described. I'm just going to show you that last one again. The first image was facing towards the north, and the other one was looking back towards the south. You'll see where Mound H is actually located. To tie together the first and second part of the talk, makes it clear that we need to continue our collaborations, that the collaborations that we do with all the different source communities, indigenous communities, and Native American people that we're working with has to continue. It's been very important to us and will continue to be very important into the future. And I'll stop with a series of thank yous. I'm assuming, Natalie and Marnie, that I should stop the share.
Yes. There we go. Thank you. That was really interesting to listen to and to see your images. So far, it looks like we've got one question from Joseph Benson. He's referring back to looking at the ridge and furrow slide. Thank you for that note. It's always nice to know what the question is referring to. How has access to drones changed your work and archaeology in general?
Access to drones. So the drones have changed a lot. You know, when they first came out, the drones helped us with aerial imagery. So basically just hooking up a camera to a drone and snapping shots from the sky have helped people all over the world understand how big sites might be, where certain parts, activity areas might be on site. But more recently, it's the technologies that these drones carry that have changed what we're able to do. For instance, that image, one of the aerial images from the drone that we had, we were able to look at some of the photos in different ways. There's a student that I work with named Emily Van Alst who was able to put the images that we had into a software program that looked at different wavelengths of light that helped bring out where some of the very subtle differences were in those furrows that we were looking at. So that's just one part. The LiDAR part, where we're able to see the subtle differences on the ground, has changed the way people look at cities, that look at trails in the past. There are places that you can see some of the buffalo trace in Indiana where the huge herds of buffalo went through, and you can actually see some of those places on LiDAR images because the bison just created such a heavy trail. And there's so many more examples like that for hooking technologies up onto drones that will then allow us to learn more and see things that we haven't been able to see before.
Okay, great. I also opened up. Was live streaming this on Facebook also, and we have a couple questions over there. Marcia Meyer asked if the Earth has shifted, how far is the alignment off?
So yeah, there are certain issues over time that can change some alignments, and those that might be related to precession or other changes in the Earth. The example that we were just providing, talking about angel mounds, we don't see much of differences. If we take a look at the site in another 20,000 years, that's why it's so important we work and we work on this now and really begin to understand, because the differences are not large right now. It's hard to quantify exactly, but if we look at, like, for instance, in the past 1,000 years, those alignments are still evident to us today, as you can see with that photograph from this past June of the sunrise on the summer solstice.
Okay. Marnie actually asked a question. In the museum's consultation efforts, has it learned more about why these celestial alignments are and were important to the community?
So thank you for that question. The context of it. This is new. A lot of what we just talked about is new. We have not, I mean, I think Marnie saw it for the first time just a couple of months ago. And that was as we were developing what some of the meanings were just from the observations. We have not worked with very many tribal partners on deciphering this. There are certain things, I'm sure, that are related to the moon, the sun, and the Milky Way. But we are at the very beginning of that. The LiDAR data, we just got the really nice LiDAR data that allowed us to even ask some of these questions and to see and observe some of these things in January of 2019. So we're still figuring things out. And because of that, we haven't really worked with a large number of individuals on the interpretations.
Okay, and then Christine Fick asks, wasn't Mound F moved in the past? The alignment was changed by Black and his crew. Was it changed back?
Yeah, that is a good question. That particular mound was